Civil War and Reconstruction. By the mid-19th century, the United States had grown dramatically in size, population, and wealth. Cities expanded, farms spread across the Midwest, and industry began to take root in the North. However, beneath this progress, deep divisions were tearing the nation apart. The question of slavery, the rights of states, and the balance of power between North and South created tensions that would ultimately lead to the bloodiest conflict in American history, the Civil War. Slavery was at the heart of the conflict. Southern states depended on enslaved labor for their cotton, tobacco, and rice plantations, while the North moved increasingly toward free labor and industrial economies. Political debates over whether new territories would allow slavery, and the moral questions surrounding the institution fueled bitter disputes. Laws like the Missouri Compromise and the Compromise of 1850 attempted to maintain a fragile balance, but they only postponed the inevitable. The 1850s were a decade of rising tension. The Kansas-Nebraska Act allowed settlers in new territories to decide whether to permit slavery, leading to violent clashes known as Bleeding Kansas. The doctored Scott decision of 1857, in which the Supreme Court ruled that enslaved people were property and had no rights as citizens, inflamed public opinion in the North. Abolitionists like Frederick Douglass, William Lloyd Garrison, and Harriet Beecher Stowe spoke passionately against slavery, spreading awareness and inspiring activism. The election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860 was the tipping point. Lincoln, a member of the newly formed Republican Party, opposed the expansion of slavery into Western territories. Southern states feared that his presidency threatened their way of life and the institution of slavery. In response, South Carolina became the first state to secede from the Union, soon followed by 10 other Southern states. These states formed the Confederate States of America, setting the stage for civil war. The Civil War officially began in April 1861 at Fort Sumter in South Carolina, where Confederate forces attacked a federal fort. The conflict rapidly escalated, engulfing the entire nation. Both sides were motivated by strong beliefs. The Union fought to preserve the nation, while the Confederacy fought to defend states' rights and maintain their social and economic systems. The war was brutal and devastating. Battles such as Antietam, Gettysburg, and Shiloh resulted in staggering casualties, with entire communities affected by the loss of fathers, brothers, and sons. Soldiers faced harsh conditions, disease, and insufficient supplies. Civilians also suffered, as homes and farms were destroyed and economies disrupted. The Civil War became not only a battle over land and politics, but also a struggle over the very meaning of freedom and human rights in America. One of the war's most significant turning points was the Emancipation Proclamation, issued by Lincoln in 1863. This executive order declared that all enslaved people in Confederate-held territories were free. While it did not immediately end slavery, it transformed the conflict into a moral struggle against human bondage and allowed African Americans to join the Union Army, contributing crucially to the war effort. Leadership on both sides shaped the outcome of the war. Lincoln's vision, combined with his careful selection of generals such as Ulysses S. Grant, ultimately led to Union victories. In the Confederacy, generals like Robert E. Lee demonstrated remarkable military skill, but resource shortages and the blockade of Southern ports weakened their position. By April 1865, Confederate forces surrendered at Appomattox Courthouse, and the Civil War came to an end, leaving the nation devastated but intact. The end of the war marked the beginning of Reconstruction, a period aimed at rebuilding the South and integrating formerly enslaved people into American society. The 13th Amendment, ratified in 1865, officially abolished slavery. The 14th Amendment granted citizenship and equal protection under the law, while the 15th Amendment protected voting rights for African American men. These amendments represented a historic expansion of civil rights, though achieving equality would remain a struggle for generations. Reconstruction faced enormous challenges. Southern states were economically devastated, and political tensions ran high. Freedmen's Bureau programs provided education, food, and legal support to formerly enslaved people, but resistance from many white Southerners, including violent groups like the Ku Klux Klan, undermined progress. Efforts to establish fair labor systems and protect civil rights often met with opposition, creating a period of both hope and frustration. Despite setbacks, Reconstruction brought lasting changes. Public schools were established in the South, African Americans gained political representation at local, state, and federal levels, and the legal framework for civil rights was laid down. Northern industry and infrastructure expanded, connecting the country through railroads, telegraphs, and growing cities. The nation was slowly healing, but the social and racial divisions exposed by the Civil War would continue to shape American society. The Civil War and Reconstruction era also transformed American identity. The concept of the United States as a unified nation was reinforced, demonstrating that federal authority could endure challenges from secessionist movements. The ideals of liberty and equality were tested in practice, and the struggle to live up to these principles became a central theme in the nation's ongoing story. Culturally, the war inspired literature, music, and art that reflected the human cost of conflict and the enduring hope for a better future. Stories of bravery, sacrifice, and resilience were passed down, shaping the collective memory of the nation. The experience of freed African Americans, their resilience in the face of discrimination, and their contributions to rebuilding the country became foundational elements of American history. By the end of Reconstruction in 1877, the United States had emerged from one of its darkest periods with significant social, political, and legal changes. The country was expanding westward, industrializing rapidly, and beginning to establish itself as a global power. Yet the legacy of slavery, the struggle for civil rights, and the memory of the Civil War continued to influence American society in profound ways. The story of the Civil War and Reconstruction is a story of conflict, courage, and transformation. It illustrates how deeply a nation's ideals can be challenged, and how resilience, leadership, and determination can guide it through the most difficult times. The period laid the foundation for the modern United States, shaping its laws, institutions, and values, and reminding us that freedom and equality are goals that require constant effort and vigilance. From the battlefields of Gettysburg to the classrooms of newly built schools in the South, the United States was a nation being rebuilt. The Civil War and Reconstruction era were not just about ending slavery, they were about defining what it meant to be American, a country striving to live up to the promises of liberty, justice, and equality for all its people.